Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. Just going to ask our host if you guys can close the doors and please don't be shy. There's a lot of room in the front too. Yeah, I'm gonna get it. Thank you. Are you getting some glasses? Yes. Okay, all right. So many friendly faces. Okay, just give us a minute to get the doors closed and we're going to get started. Well, welcome everyone to today's session on gender and power, equity at work. I am Dr. Rupa Datt, the Executive Director of Women in Global Health. I am so delighted to welcome you to today's conversation. We're going to make sure this is an interactive conversation, have an incredible panel lineup here, and welcome you all to this session. This session on gender and power equity at work is a very critical one to talk about at this point in time. And I'm going to be sharing some of the latest findings from Women in Global Health on the topic. But before I introduce our expert panelists, I want to share some of the highlights from Women in Global Health's latest report. Women in Global Health, we launched in 2015 by finding ourselves asking this question: how is it that we're in such a talented field with so many talented women, but when you take a look at the most top leadership positions in global health, women are underrepresented, especially the women that are often the target of our programs. So what we did in 2023 is we did a review looking at the progress of women's leadership in global health from the launch of Women in Global Health's time to now. So Women in Global Health since 2023 has grown to have over 47 chapters around the world. And some of the context, just so that you know, when we talk about women delivering most of the health in global health, women represent 70% of the health workforce, often 90% of the frontline patient facing forward roles. And when you take a look at senior leadership roles, women are often only 25% of those senior leadership roles. And when the pandemic started in COVID-19, we knew that women were already underrepresented. And so to help understand the context post-pandemic, we did a review called the XX Paradox in Health Leadership, looking at the state of women and leadership in global health. We took a deep dive, particularly looking into countries India, Kenya, and Nigeria to really understand what was happening in the national context as well as the wider global context when it comes to women's leadership. Last month, we launched this report at the 67th Commission on the Status of Women, and the report highlights the urgent need for action to change the status quo regarding gender inequities in the health workforce. Critically, our new analysis finds that progress has stalled. In 2023, women still hold only 25% of leadership positions in global health. And although progress has been made in some countries and global health organizations, the glass ceiling largely remains intact, especially from women that are the targets of most of global health. For example, only 1 out of the 13 GAP agencies that work on the Global Sustainable Goal SDG 3 has a woman that is from a low-income country heading it. Only 1 out of 13. We call this a broken pipeline because women are working in the national health system, and while they are majority of the health workforce, they're not getting the top leadership roles. Politics are always at play. Merit is not good enough to ensure women get the jobs they are qualified for. Women candidates also need support from men and women and allies from all genders to generate the political capital required to secure appointments, especially when appointments are decided by groups of national governments. We're also hearing that it's not enough to get the role, but women need to be supported in those roles. Of concern, we found that women have not only lost ground in leadership in the pandemic. For example, at the WHO Executive Board meeting in January 2022, at the peak of the pandemic, only 6% of member state representatives were women, down from a high of 32% in 2020. A Women in Global Health study in 2020 found that 85% of COVID-19 task teams were majority male membership, and there were dozens that were all male membership around the world. The consequences of excluding women resulted in gender blind policies, including gender blind lockdown policies. We also found that reports that looked at the data, what services were being shut down. Many countries shut down safe maternity and sexual and reproductive health services as not considering them essential. And we know that pregnancies and childbirth do not stop for pandemics. On the front lines of the response, women health workers typically managed a double burden of high patient numbers, long hours, high stress, and risk at work, lack of PPE or ill-fitting PPE, plus additional unpaid care work at home and in the community. After 3 years, women health workers are burnt out, traumatized, and understandably, women are leaving the health sector at high levels in what is called the Great Resignation, especially in high-income countries, which threatens to deepen the global health worker shortage of 10 million and reduce women's leadership representation. Linked to the Great Resignation is also a Great Migration, and we are going to be releasing a report on this in the coming weeks. Despite the contextual differences between the countries, Nigeria, India, and Kenya, the most surprising findings were the similarities in qualitative data describing the challenges experienced by women working in health in these countries. First, gender norms and roles limit women's participation at work, specifically the cultural pressure on women to prioritize caregiving and domestic responsibilities in the home over professional ambitions. Secondly, women's experience discrimination linked to what's called the motherhood penalty. This can take many forms, from invisible bias to inadequate policies to explicit prejudice. A woman in Nigeria reported being punished for falling pregnant and then being posted to remote locations when she returned from her maternity leave. And all women are subject to this penalty before, during, and after they may or may not have children. And this really stood out. It didn't matter which cultural context the women were in, but they were facing the motherhood penalty. They were assumed to be the caregivers across their life course. Thirdly, gender stereotypes around leadership deter and penalize women, but benefit men. When women demonstrate characteristics associated with male leadership, they're labeled as bossy or aggressive. On the other hand, women leaders who adopt a more empathetic style of leadership can face a backlash of being too emotional. It is truly the tightrope women leaders must walk, and we found this across the 3 countries. Fourth, commitments and policies are not being implemented. This is especially concerning in relation to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment and bullying, where the unequal power dynamics between sexes is highly segregated in the health sector and are exploited by male perpetrators. Yet across the countries in our study, the experience of respondents confirmed that policies are not working enough to protect women health workers. And in addition, certain groups, especially trainees, interns, migrant women, women of marginalized races, castes, and ethnicities, cadres, including community health workers, are at a higher risk of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment in the health due to the unequal power dynamics at play. Some of the testimonies include that when women were reporting sexual harassment or bullying taking at the workplace, that they faced retaliation instead of protection from their employers, to the point one woman described how she had to leave the workplace and find a new employment, and of course that impacts career progression. The systemic bias exposed by the research illustrates how workplaces with human resource policies designed for the default man gives men an advantage over women in access to leadership. We're calling this the male bonus syndrome, because they are advantaged by the rules and also because women are eliminated from the competition. Men also gain from the gender pay gap in health, which is 24%, higher than many other sectors. The figure is likely an underestimate, as it does not include the estimated 6 million women community health workers who are subsidizing global health through their unpaid and grossly underpaid labor. Our findings from India, Kenya, and Nigeria show that gender imbalance in health leadership will not change fast enough. In our conclusion, the answer is not to fix women to fit into workplaces, but really to fix the systems, fix the systemic bias that creates these barriers. We are estimating at the rate that global health is currently proceeding when it comes to closing the gender gap in global health leadership, that it will take at least 100 years. Our research is asking for more than simple policy measures. We're asking for gender transformative policy measures, for example, family-friendly policies that will intentionally enable more equal sharing of work and childcare between men and women so that both can fulfill their potential at work. When we get this right, health can be an exemplar sector, generating gender transformative lessons for the rest of the economy. Finally, gender equal leadership in health will have what we call the gender triple dividend. As many of you know, that spring meetings are happening at the World Bank, and we are calling for an investment in the health workforce from a gender transformative point of view. And we know when we do this, the triple dividend will result in a health dividend, strengthening health systems, decision-making, aiding recruitment and retention, a gender dividend since women will gain both income and agency, and an economic dividend since stronger health systems create new health jobs created and filled will drive economic growth. And especially in these times, as every country is facing some form of economic turmoil, we are calling an investment in the health workforce, an investment in women from a gender transformative, not a cost, but really one with great return. So with these thoughts in mind, I am now pleased to turn to our 5 inspiring panelists. We're going to be having a very riveting discussion and really talking about the issues surrounding power and equity. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our panelists. We are joined today by Dr. Cholwe Jacobs, who is a global and public health professional and researcher committed to advancing gender equity and global health. She's a researcher on women, child, and adolescents, infectious and NCDs with over 15 years of experience. She's also the co-founder of Women in Global Health Zambia and a Harvard Lead Fellow as well. We're joined by Lanice Williams, who's the chair of the Women in Global Health DC chapter. She's a senior program officer at JPEGO, where she provides cross-cutting management and pragmatic support for maximizing options to advance informed choice for HIV prevention. She has experience in policy advocacy, coalition building, civil society, and partnership engagements. We're also joined by Sagri Singh. She is the Chief of Gender and Health at the United Nations University International Institute for Global Health. Sagri brings over 25 years of experience in designing and conducting research, program, and advocacy initiatives on sexual and reproductive health and rights in South Asia and East and Southern Africa. We're also joined by Veena Hulam. She leads the global health activities and partnerships at the American Public Health Association. She works on the policy advocacy issues, communications, and professional development. She also serves as a treasurer for the Alliance for Public Health Associations of the Americas. We are also joined by Dr. Maria Julia Maju Burnett, who is an associate professor at the School of Health at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. She has conducted interdisciplinary research across a broad spectrum of topics in health equity, urban poverty, sustainable development, underrepresentation of women and minorities in STEM, and she is very committed to promoting social justice, fighting systemic racism, and reduce social inequalities locally and globally. So a warm welcome to our panelists, and we're going to dive right in. Thank you. So Cholwe, turning to you, we want to hear directly about your experience and career pathway, and what are some of the challenges that you have faced when it comes to race, gender, class, to get to where you are today.
Thank you, Rupa, and thank you everybody for joining in here and to be able to listen to our experiences. So I think my journey, I would say, starts way back as a child, my journey of leadership. I was raised, over half of my childhood life was raised with a single household mother, and she was a widow. And so because of that, I learned, and also for the fact that I was the firstborn and with 4 siblings, I was made to know that I was the lead in the household and having to take a number of roles, but also being reminded by my mother that you are the lead for this household. So that in me helped me to shape myself as a leader. But over time, I've realized that did not help me as much, because I took myself as being person to deliver and provide care in the house. But also coming to my career path, my profession, I'm a nurse by background, and growing in the nursing profession and also working as a nurse dominated by women, leadership didn't mean a lot to me because the environment and also the gap in leadership didn't mean a lot because the environment was dominated by females. It was until when I got to an academic level and became an academic faculty member when I realized in the School of Public Health that these gender inequities, particularly in leadership, were really existing. And unfortunately, I may say so, at a point when I was just joining the academic environment, I was appointed as an assistant dean for postgraduate programs. It was at that time that I began to discover what was happening. Initially, I was so naive about the resistance I was getting from the fellow faculty. It was difficult for me to deliver because I was getting resistance. And what I did about that was each time I'm getting resistance to certain roles that I was delegating to my colleagues, I would end up doing it myself because I felt I had to do it. And that made me try to push in the most, try out some courses and push myself further so that I may be accepted and affirmed, because I felt like I wasn't competitive enough, and this is why I was getting this struggle. So I pushed myself very hard to attain certain qualifications that I thought would approve me for my role as a leader. And here I am. I went to Johns Hopkins and got my postdoc in bioethics. Even with that, it didn't seem to matter, because when you apply yourself, you sit in for grant applications, and in academia with research writing, you are all called to apply for a grant. And usually I found myself being the one to do the first draft. So Cholwe would do the first draft, Cholwe to take notes. And that helped me over time because I was so experienced. But I realized that even if I was doing this, I never had an opportunity to lead any grant. And this is why I was pushing myself. I got my postdoc from Johns Hopkins. I went back. The environment seemed to be the same. And currently, I'm a lead fellow at the Harvard School of Public Health, Global Health. And even then, this resistance is still there. And one of the things that I've realized is that even when last week, I was in a class of many other female leaders at different levels, it looks like the narration is the same. Even the women that are in the most senior levels, they seem to be lonely, even when we look up to them, because their struggles seem to be similar to some of others that are at the medium level. So Rupa, I think one of the things that I would say is that the challenges are quite many. We try by all means as female to capacitate ourselves, do so much to be able to compete, but it looks like the competition is never attainable because we never manage to compete with males. So that's what I wanted to say, the challenges. And one thing that I've learned is this could be because of what we are seeing and realizing, the gender-related disparities, but also related to age.
Yeah, Cholwe, I wanted to ask you a follow-up on that. We talk a lot about fixing systems and not fixing women at Women in Global Health. What are your thoughts when we say that, given the journey you've had? I mean, clearly you have invested a lot of time in yourself, and you've, and I would say even argue, lost a lot of time in all the extra things you had to do to get recognition, and at the same time you're still facing this glass ceiling. What would you say on fixing the systems bit?
Okay, so I think when we come to fixing systems, it looks like the systems themselves are not in a position to support women. The systems themselves, I want to give a quick example, and allow me to do that. In academic, for a woman in academic environment, for a woman to, so we get promotion by points and publications. But we also know that women have a number of disruptions because she has this journey of childbearing, she'll go on maternity leave, she has to attend to a family. But when it comes to promotion, you have to compete with the same points and the same H index. And so what that means is that our system are not sensitive enough to take care of some of the differences that are there between the roles of a woman and the roles of a female and male, even in these work environments. So it's this kind of challenges within our systems that we think that they need to be paid attention to. And we think that if such would be fixed, probably women would have an opportunity to apply to their full potential.
Yeah, thank you, Chalwe. I'm going to turn to you, Lenise. Yes, same question. Share with us your incredible journey and the challenges that you faced.
So as it relates to my journey, I think for me, it's early to start back to what influenced my journey as a leader. And I would say for that, it was my late maternal grandmother, how the advocacy I saw her do in our community back home in Jamaica, and the pathway that she took, including a lot of the health challenges that she faced in the healthcare system there, is what really influenced my journey as a leader. I would always tell people public health and global health is what I fell into, because my initial career path that I thought I would take was to become an OBGYN. But then I realized I was passionate about issues that impact women and girls, including all of their gender identities. And I wanted to take more of a non-clinical approach to that. So that's kind of how I fell into global health. And I mean, of course, I took the traditional path. You study your undergrad degree, you get your master's, you look for your next career opportunity. I would say I started off in US-based public health, working at the intersection of health, but also education and positive youth development. But I would say once I transitioned into doing more global type of work, and I would just say for me, it's challenges that I'm still encountering now, dealing with microaggressions, racism, stereotypes, biases, whether they're implicit or explicit, and how does that all shape and impact how I view myself as a leader, what I can contribute to the work that I'm doing. And I think when you couple that with unwelcoming work environments, I can be very transparent and honest and say, I have questioned my capabilities and what I can add, but I have been very fortunate and grateful that I've had mentors and sponsors that have really invested in me and have shown me otherwise. And some of those people have opened up a lot of pathways for me and what I've been able to obtain and where I can go. And I think within our sector, whether you work in global health or not, there is a lot more conversations that need to go beyond just gender in itself, because all of us have social identities and stratifiers that put us at that level of where we find that power and privilege and imbalance. And a lot of that also contributes to a lot of systems of oppression, whether it's on the policy level, whether it's on the community level, or within organizations that impact how women, regardless of their race, class, gender, sexual orientation, are able to actually obtain leadership opportunities.
Thank you, Lenise, and appreciate your just you being candid about the toll it takes, right? The trauma that one incurs from a gender point of view, but the broader social identities that everyone has, and the racism piece too. I wanted, if I can put you on the spot a bit, is that, I learned a little bit about the research you're currently doing when it looks at particularly the experience of Black women in global health. Are you able to share any early insights of, first for the room to hear about your incredible work that you're doing, and some early insights, because it is critical that we talk about gender with an intersectionality aspect. So please, Lenise.
Yeah, thank you, Rupa. So what Rupa was hinting to, I just recently completed Women's Live Health Leadership Journey Program for those that are in North America. And for my leadership project, I decided to really focus on what are a lot of those barriers that prevent Black women in Africa and the diaspora, regardless of where you're located in the world, from obtaining those senior and executive leadership opportunities. Like, we know the statistics, right? Women make up 70% of the healthcare workforce, but only 25% of those leadership roles. But when we look at it, particularly among Black women in Africa and the diaspora, there are often underrepresented, and there are not many people in those positions. So I wanted to really look at and see what are some of those things. So I actually just finished I started off with a phase 1 group of speaking to key stakeholders. I spoke to about 15 or so women across 7 to 9 countries. and just to kind of get some early indications of what are going on, what are the challenges, what are you seeing, what's preventing you from moving up. Of course, we know out beyond like the patriarchy, we know that system of oppressions are deep, right? We know global health is built off of colonialistic foundations. We do have to be very honest and transparent about that, but also the way that white supremacy plays a role in some of those and continues to perpetuate those systems of oppression and trauma that many communities continue to see. So I think that's some of the things that have came up, but I'm also finishing up some focus group interviews to kind of further see and look at how are you creating these leadership pipelines for other women to come up and be able to access those same opportunities beyond mentorship? Also, how are we looking for sponsorship? Because we know sponsorship is really key as well when we're talking about moving up into senior and executive roles within the global health sector.
Thank you, Lenise. And just to follow up to that, I mean, it's really interesting what you are saying and the barriers and openly talking about, you know, an anti-oppression agenda here. In these conversations, what was the experience for you to hear you know, these experiences? Was it validating, or was it how have you processed it as someone that is a leader, paving the way for the next generation, as you're also entering a space where you need others to transform the space of global health?
Yeah, I mean, I would say beyond validating, like, okay, I'm not the only person that's experiencing these things. It just really shows, right? We're almost 3 years post the George Floyd incident, which I think was a pivotal thing that made a lot of people in the US, but also international and global organizations really take a look at what are the policies that are being put in place. And I think we have a lot of work to do. This work is just not about transforming systems within an organizational ecosystem, but also what is the work that we're doing on our personal level? What are the biases that we know we come into when we're doing the work that we're doing? How are we checking our biases and making sure that we're opening space and giving opportunities to others that do want to contribute and create change, but also like being mindful that we're not pushing an agenda that's going to further create harm. Right? We know there's a lot of talk about localization from USAID and a lot of different donors, and what does that look like and how do you operationalize that? But I think as we're even working in partnership with others in other countries, we need to also make sure that we're not trying to tell them like, this is what I think you should do, but instead of coming from a partnership lens and angle.
Thank you, Lenise. We'll be definitely coming back to both of you. I want to turn to this side, and same questions. Zachary, for you, for you to share a bit about your career pathway and your analysis of the barriers that you faced. Yeah.
Thanks, Rupa, and thank you for this opportunity to share my experience. And I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you in the audience and on the panel about your experiences and how we can collectively make a difference. So I grew up in India, and I was fortunate to grow up in a family that really valued independence and had strong women role models. So it was a bit of a shock when I came into my career to realize that I was experiencing as a young public health professional, both in India and then later in the US, I experienced discrimination related to my race, my sex, my age, and even my experience. And I was often talking to and working with and in partnership with a number of male men, doctors with a lot of experience, particularly in India, and struggling to be able to both find my voice and validation and also be acknowledged in the contributions that I was making. And that was really difficult. I was very lucky because I had an amazing supervisor who herself was the head of an organization, a PhD and a doctor, and yielded her power and her position to support me and address some of these really traditional and entrenched gender norms that limited the space for young people, and particularly young women who were starting to come into the workspace. And I think that that was really, really profound, both in terms of an experience, because she didn't just throw me there, but she also mentored me. But it also showed me how one could be a better and more effective and equitable leader. Similarly, I had an experience with another supervisor who was a white male who actually made it a point, not just for me as a young professional he was supervising, but others in the organization that we were working in, to create opportunities, identify spaces where we could be visible, and really push us, encourage us, and support us to be able to take our place in those spaces and be able to present our thoughts, our insights, and our expertise in those spaces. And we grew. I grew certainly, and I learned a lot in that experience. And I do feel that that's an incredibly important experience to have when you're a young professional, because that is the time when you can really be second guessing yourself a lot. And it's an opportunity where you either get broken or you get made, or you then have to spend time remaking yourself. So I think that was an incredible experience for me, and I learned a lot from it. And I try to emulate some of those things as I move forward as a leader. I would like to make another point that came up in my early years, which is that while I was experiencing this discrimination and bias, I also had a position of privilege and power. And this was a realization that came to me and was also flagged to me by a friend and colleague, because as a young woman who spoke English, who had the opportunity to work in the US and study in the US, and came from the middle class with the support of family, I could play a role of either amplifying the voices of my other colleagues who might not have that ability or did not feel safe to do it. I could bring their concerns to management and to other fora. And more importantly, I could either create the space and make them, give them the space to speak to the issues that they needed to speak to and support them. So I feel from both of those experiences, I learned a tremendous amount, and I try and carry that through my life and through the work that I'm doing in supervising. Thanks.
I really appreciate that you went exactly there, that each one of us has a level of privilege, and this panel by design is a panel of all women of color. I hope some of you picked up on that. And the reason, we wanted to also have this kind of conversation from an intersectionality point of view is that everyone carries a level of privilege and disadvantages, and how can we use our platforms to practice allyship too? We often talk about allyship only from those that are at the highest levels, but women are practicing allyship to each other. Women from different backgrounds are practicing allyship, and along the journey, when we in global health, we particularly call this the framework of gender transformative leadership at Women in Global Health, but it is very much about challenging the power and privilege. So I really appreciate the examples that you shared, and both of the mentorship you received and how you've used your platform. So I'm going to actually turn to you, Veena, and you've done a lot of work on leadership overall, deep work in analyzing leadership, but also your career has been very, very interesting in navigating both nationally and internationally global health. So yeah, turning to you.
Yeah, so my kind of journey started in global health is a little bit more non-traditional. I started, my undergrad was in environmental science and policy, and didn't get into global health until I came to work, coming back from after undergrad, going and teaching English in Japan and kind of giving me a little bit more of a worldly view, and coming back and trying to figure out like what did I really want to do. Working for an organization such as EPHA and getting involved in a lot of the global health activities, meeting members who are working in different spaces within global health really exposed me to, what's out there, what's possible. And, some of those members have also been very critical as far as cultivating my professional development and challenging me to think, beyond kind of tradition, thinking outside of the box. I have to say, from my point of view, being an Asian American woman, there are some challenges, I think. the perception, mainly as far as the being an Asian and being a woman, it's a double bind. And just recognizing, the statistics that are out there, 49% of Asian American women are, hold graduate degrees, over 25 hold graduate degrees, and that's a bachelor's degree or higher, and even a higher percentage are most likely to have a graduate degree. However, not many of them are represented in leadership positions, and not many of them are recognized. They're often overlooked or forgotten. So the question becomes, what's responsible for that leadership gap? And maybe some of that has to do with cultural values and traditions, that you're brought up in, and how that plays a role. So I think I've looked at that in terms of my family and being a second generation daughter of immigrants, and seeing what has held me back, and then using that also as a platform for how that can also propel me forward. So looking at that as a weakness, but then also using that to kind of propel yourself forward, and recognizing that that's a gap or that's a weakness that you have to address. So in some ways, it's like towing the line between what's perceived, from an Asian woman perspective. You're seen as being quiet and nice. But then how do you challenge that persona or that stereotype and speak up more, and also to raise the issues in a way that you're not also seen as someone who's overly aggressive. Tiger Woman is also Dragon Lady, as far as that persona is concerned. So trying to figure out where you sit within that, and depending on the situation and who you are working with, when is it appropriate to kind of challenge those stereotypes? When is it appropriate to work within those lines, and accept maybe the limitations of that, and try to move forward as best as you can?
Thank you, Vina, for really also being just so open and sharing that perspective, the Asian American experience, and one that we are very much reflecting more and more in the U.S. about the Asian experience, and not a monolithic one, but one with a lot of diversity and lots of different groups with lots of different generational experience. And when you mentioned the word about the Tiger Lady, or the that stereotype, in my mind, I was thinking, we have words that describe so many of this phenomena for women of color, yet it's not, brought into the broader discourse on women's leadership. So I think, as women of color walk the tightrope, they walk even a tighter tightrope, because we have to be the ally to all of the agenda for women's leadership, but at the same time, we have unique challenges that we're facing, and yet there isn't quite a platform for that. So, thanks for sharing that, Vina, and we'll definitely be coming back to you. So, Maju, to you, you also have a very interesting, research career and work across borders, both in the U.S., but also very much your connections to Peru. So would be great to hear your career pathway and your journey from the Americas.
Thank you, Rupa, and good afternoon, everybody. I feel privileged and honored to have a seat in this table, and with these amazing, powerful, strong women. And all I have to say to begin is that my greatest asset is my gender. And that's very important. I have had that clear since I was born in a family of 6 girls. And the biggest gift my parents could give me, I was born and raised in the global South, I think is knowing poverty firsthand. So I was born and raised in this resource poor family, but very hardworking. And we knew that education was the only thing to break the vicious cycle of poverty. We had that clear every day. So my journey, I have developed a career at the intersection of engineering, male-dominant world. My 3 degrees are actually in engineering, industrial and systems engineering. But I think, again, as a woman, I felt that my life experiences of knowing and witnessing harsh, inhuman conditions for workers really led me to think about public health. through the aspect, through the discipline of human factors engineering. And then I fell in love, of course, with public health, in global health primarily. So back in the 90s, when I was working in manufacturing plants, industrial workers, and harsh conditions of work, and then later came to the US for grad school, I was really shocked. And I'm still shocked because it's 2023 and things have not changed. Those are the bad news I have for you. When you think about poultry processing plants, farm workers, tomato pickers, construction workers, and I've done work in all those areas here in the US, I am still shocked that the world is not outraged about this. And I'm not talking just because I have a passion in occupational health or occupational health, but it's the same thing when we talk about healthcare workers. And something needs to happen. So the biggest barrier I confronted today is structural racism and the inequalities that the systems allow. These are persistent inequalities. And my experiences also are biased because I only can speak for academia, that I've been part of an academic member in the past 20 years. Of course, I work in an ivory tower and I have a privileged seat, I have tenure, but I question myself every day and I invite everybody else in academia, a woman working in global health, questioning themselves, what are you doing to move the needle towards achieving health equity? I am tired of attending conferences and asking, and this is research, right? Research. Things that are being presented. I'm really tired when I keep asking, so what is the impact? How do you measure the impact of that? Well, we need more time. Well, that's a complex question, good question. So you see, look at the top 20 global health schools in the world. Look at their mission. Look what they say. We're training the next generation to create agents of change and, promote health and well-being for all. Look at yourself, look within your walls, and what are you doing to really understand who is doing what? So that's very complicated, and I have to deal with that every single day because as a woman of color, people think, oh, and being from Peru, the global south, oh, you are doing research on tuberculosis, that's great. Well, because I'm from Peru and I'm from the global south, I should be doing that. And that's not the point. It's me. So I have a lot to talk, but I'll stop there.
Maja, you really said the elephant in the room, and it begins at the highest levels of global health and the gender and the linkage, again, as many of the panelists have said, to race, ethnicity, origin, other social stratifiers. And we can't keep approaching these challenges from the same point of view, same vantage point. I mean, the report that I shared some highlights, it only looks at the last few years, but even then, our estimates are it's going to take 100 years, whether we look at the World Economic Forum estimates or estimates coming from other global indexes on gender equality, and projections in global health show that's going to take us at least 100 years before women get equal leadership. So what are we going to do to really do things differently? So I'm actually going to turn to Cholwe, and we already asked you, Cholwe, a bit about fixing the systems, but what's promising? What's giving you hope?
Okay, so I think there's an area that I would want to talk about that I feel if we take that as one of our approaches, we would be striking. So this is around mobilizing men. So I feel men need to step in as allies, and we need to work with men. They have a joint responsibility to help achieve this gender equity. While we're talking about gender equity in global health leadership, as women, we cannot do it alone because this is a joint responsibility. So I feel there is hope if we do this jointly. It's a global health issue. It's a global health good. So we need to jointly do it with the men. And I feel this is potentials, because I will give an example. Women in Global Health Zambia chapter, we found that the times that we've spoken and invited men to have insight to what we're talking about, it's really been impactful, and we've seen that that works. And I want to say that we really need men in this, but also for the few women that have gone to the high tables, we have also learned, we have lessons learned. We have learned that when we get to those tables, we're able to network. Some of us, we found ourselves where we are because we had mentors that connected us to people. I didn't know Rupa, but my mentor connected me to Rupa. And so we need to keep encouraging our young women to keep networking, intentional networking. Be intentional and find people. And also mentorship. I think we don't have to shy away from asking for mentors. We need to look out for these people and ask to be mentored, because sometimes people, the actual mentors really, usually they are busy and they may not really pay attention. And of course, this doesn't mean that we don't have to, as mentors, we don't have to look out to people that we need to mentor. But I think we all have a joint role as at different levels as women to take responsibility, because this is something that we need to achieve. It's a public global health good, and we cannot achieve until women also are part of the conversations, are part of decision making at the table. In fact, in public health, we all know that women hold, I think the majority of the health burden, even in low and middle income, it's more on women. They are either affected, or they are the ones, or they are taking care of these people that may have illnesses. So I think this is something that I would want to talk about, Rupa. There's hope if we network, and there's hope if we can bring to the table men who are allies, and with joint co-design strategies that we can together work with.
Cholwe, appreciate that acknowledgement of saying that gender equality benefits everybody and is really everybody's responsibility. But what would you say makes male allyship work? I mean, there are a lot of men that walk around saying, I'm a feminist now, I'm a gender champion, or, oh, you know, I mentor these 3 women, therefore I am so committed. But the reality of it is when you look at the numbers, men are not leaning out, and particularly white men from certain privileged backgrounds are not leaning out. They're still a boys' club. So how is male allyship going to work for women? And I'd say women that are facing the greatest amount of challenges to get to the highest levels of leadership.
Yeah, I know it's difficult to believe that they may contribute to this, but I think we have also a responsibility to keep creating awareness on why, when we talk about gender equity in global health leadership, why we keep pushing for this agenda, because we know, as Rupa put it, there's a triple dividend in this, and we know there's economic benefit in this. So I think. And the other thing I want to mention also is that currently men are holding these leadership positions. And we are also talking about gender transformative leadership policies. So it's the people that are currently on these leadership positions that we need to keep knocking on the door. And as we knock on the door, we're not fighting, but we're just trying to say, let's sit together, let's discuss, and let's see how we can work together, because we think we have a lot to bring to the table. I hope I've responded.
Of course, you responded.
But I think even the men, when they get to the discussion point, we can hear from them.
Lanice, to you.
I think Cholwe really highlighted some of the things that are promising. I do think male allyship is key. For example, in my own experience, there are many of men that are in senior executive leadership positions that have opened a lot of doors for me, have been my biggest champions and advocates as well. But I also think what I do see as promising is the next future generation of leaders that are coming up, that are speaking truth to power, that are calling things as they are and holding people accountable. I think we need more accountability for individuals as well, especially when we're talking about doing and pushing policies or practices that can be very harmful, especially to the communities that we're working with and those that we are working with. as well. So yeah, those are some of the things I would say.
Yeah, and Lenise, I'd like you to unpack a little bit more about when you talk about more accountability. What does that look like in a pragmatic way? What would the ecosystem in global health need to be accountable to those that we are all collectively trying to serve, the hardest to reach populations, whether it is locally here in the United States or from whichever locally from our own perspectives of the countries we're all from? What does that really look like?
I think accountability looks like if you're going to say you're going to do something, you follow through on what you say, right? And if we're working with people, you're holding them to their word. You're making sure that they're actually putting action to what they're saying that they're going to do. For example, when we're talking about changing policies, or for example, I think the best example to give is after the George Floyd incidents, we've seen a lot of global health institutions come out about their DEI commitments. What does diversity, equity, inclusion, also including belonging and accessibility look like in their organizations? I feel like we've heard people talk about it, but we have not seen that in action, right? So I think for many of us, and whether it's in our own prospective organizations, if we're saying we're going to do this work, holding them accountable to actually do the work. And I think when it comes to even topics that relates to DEI, it's not a comfortable conversation to have. It's never going to be comfortable for anyone, especially when we're talking about race and trauma and all those other things that are compounded by that. But I think it's a conversation and a discussion that is needed. And I think for global health to be transformed, including the policies, I think we need to have more of these conversations. I think we need to see more action, less lip service and more action, really following through on the commitments that that's gonna do. We know some change is not gonna happen overnight. It's gonna take time, but I think making sure we're committed to actually doing the work. I think that work is just not about your organization, but it's also doing that work in our own personal lives as well.
Thank you, Lenise. And it's, there was a reckoning in global health that was happening simultaneously, especially amongst women's rights organizations, organizations working in SRHR. And do you have hope that that is still moving forward? I was going to go there, so.
I would say I'm hopeful. I think like everyone else, we're all watching, we're all seeing what's going to happen. It's one thing to say you're going to do it, and it's a different thing to actually do it. I would say I'm hopeful. I have colleagues that have worked in some of these organizations. Some are no longer there, but I'm hopeful and just really want to see what's going to come in the years to come. I know with one of those organizations, I know that they're trying to do a lot more work from what I can see externally. And I'm just hoping the work that they're doing externally is also transforming what they're doing internally as an institution as well, including with those that they're working with around the world.
Thank you, Lenise, for that. And and you brought the historical context quite significant here in DC with the Black Lives Matter. If those of you visiting us in town, please do check out that square. It was a very symbolically, it's very meaningful for the struggle of Black people and a lot of people of color in this country. And what I found in another sector, talking about accountability, is that many corporations came behind the slogan of Black Lives Matter, a lot of big announcements. But when you take a look at what investments financially went into this, it never quite happened. So that's an example of the accountability. And so I think, Lenise, you're talking about not just the window dressing language. Madhu, you talked about the window dressing language, but how do we take the conversation forward? So I turn to you, Sagiri. Please, chime in. And I know that you also come from a background of working deeply on sexual reproductive health and rights, and bringing that perspective in, as well as looking at institutional change.
Great, thanks, Rupa. I wanted to reflect a little bit about a particular research study we did, led by my colleague Joanna Riha, who's not here today but is online. It was a study looking at with UN agencies working on the intersection of gender and health of what are some of the successful factors in mainstreaming gender within both institutions, but as well as programs and policies. And of the 5, we labeled them the powers. Of the 5 powers, the one that struck me the most was, well, all of them are relevant here, and I'll list them out for you. It's the power of data, the power of self. So we've been talking about self-reflexivity, the power of feminist leadership, and this is also something people have been flagging, and the power of the collective. And I want to spend a bit of time talking about the power of the collective, because I think what has happened over the years is that we all experience discrimination and bias in our personal and professional lives, but we have not been able to successfully come together as a movement to break that isolation, break that colonial approach of divide and conquer, and come together to support one another and find spaces where we can not only collaborate, but raise each other up and provide that support. So I think the power of collective is something we must consider. And I start to see also in today's world, there is this fragmentation happening with the women's movement and the trans movement and other movements that really need to come together and support each other. And I think this is really critical that we need to think about, that we don't start getting defragmented again, so that the opposition can start to pick us apart as they have done so well in the past. In terms of an example, in an organization that I was working with a few years ago, one of the things that speaks beautifully to this power of the collective was a gender push group that was created. And the gender push group brought together women from all different parts of the organization, whether it was roles people were playing, the geographies that they were located in, because this was an international organization, age, sex, sexual orientation. And really brought them together. And we really talked about what were some of the experiences and the biases, discriminations, and some of the successful approaches we'd used. And very quickly, we came to realize that we could collaborate with one another. We needn't be isolated. And we could, as a collective, push the institutional powers and make things happen. So when you talk about accountability, a collective group pushing for something at every level, from the highest to the lowest level, becomes incredibly important, because not one person or one group of people can change things, but together we can make a significant difference. I think the other thing that it helped us do is also reflect on our own biases and issues that we might have in the way we approach each other, that we might be historically carrying from our own childhood or socialization. And I think that was another really important piece that helped to break the barriers and promote the kind of solidarity that we needed, the trust that we needed to really build that movement within the organization. And we were able to successfully move not everything, but certain things in terms of institutional policies. And if you look at that, if you just reflect that piece to then going into reproductive sexual health rights movement, it's the same conversation. It's really important that we come together, we find common ground, but more importantly, we should be able to identify when it's time for us to take a step back so that others in the group can be supported and have the space. How can we create space for those who have not yet had the opportunity to have that space? And then how do we come forward and in a sisterhood more broadly, be able to support one another? So I think that that's really critical to start to do 2 things: break the power that currently exists, which largely seems to be on gender lines, but more importantly, actually switch the narrative, because as someone said, that the current structures don't work, but we continue to try to straitjacket ourselves and try to make a difference within that structure. And I think more and more what we need to do is say, this doesn't work, out it goes. We are going to try something new and different. And we see leaders. I mean, I think the leader of New Zealand was a prime example of that, of doing things differently and achieving success. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Really appreciate those 2 examples. And, we have an opportunity to break from the past, and especially as there's conversations happening here and around the world and in this town about how do we use what's happened in this pandemic to create health systems differently. Really, the message there is we are trying to have women fit into these systems designed by men for men, but really health systems should be designed by all for all. And how do we do that? And it requires a true transformation process to take place. I'm actually going to turn to you, Veena, to chime in about how we can address some of these inequalities we're seeing in global health.
So coming from an association perspective, as a professional association for public health professionals, we talk a lot about what are programs and policies that are in place that enable young professionals to move up the leadership ladder, or even promoting those from minority backgrounds or even women. And there's a lot of talk about leadership opportunities and structures that need to be further developed, or even mentorship. A lot of discussion around how that should work. I also come from kind of a school of thought, having gone through, it wasn't until I started on my doctoral studies for public health leadership that I started to really examine much more in terms of broader structures. So one of the articles that I would recommend anyone interested in this topic to read would be The Dawn of Systems Leadership. It's in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. It's an article, talks a lot about what makes up a systems, the qualities that make up a systems leader. But one thing that really resonated with me was, how do you bring people along on your journey? What's the leadership legacy that you want to leave behind? And we often talk a lot about looking forward and looking for mentors, looking upwards. I would say you're looking for people who can help mentor you, but how often do we also turn around and look at people who we can also bring along with us on our journey as well? And who can you help to take with you, and also help to be a mentor to them, but also to take them along on your journey. So if we're talking about changing systems, being change agents, personal reflection, I think is quite important for us as women. If we are really outnumbering in terms of, in this field, if we're really outnumbering the men, I think it's also a question of, what are we as women, how are we helping to promote each other? How are we bringing each other along on the journey? That this is not necessarily a competition, that we're all in this together, in the same boat, facing similar challenges, trying to solve the same problem from each of our own standpoints. So how can we be helpful to each other as well?
Thank you, Veena, about that point of reflecting not just what's ahead, but what's behind. And there was a young woman I met from Kenya who said, it's critical that every woman that has a seat at the table makes sure she's thinking about who's going to occupy that seat as she moves on to the next seat. And I would say that, we've heard about male allyship. I'd say that all men can also practice the same, not just thinking about which young man they're going to be creating the seat for, but which young woman, or which young woman from a diverse background. And so I really like that, example that you were saying. And, on the systems piece of it, APHA has hosted lots of intersectionality discussions. We've had the ability, Veena, to have a partnership with you, particularly at Women in Global Health, to host conversations for over 5 years on these issues. Reflecting back, what would you say has been the role of dialogue, and how do organizations such as APHA and here the World Health Summit, both the World Health Summit that hosts us in Berlin, and the regional meeting has created space for these discussions to take place? What role do platforms such as this have to advance these issues?
I think that's a good question. I think the importance of bringing different perspectives together. And I think that's very critical to these conversations, not just being the echo chamber, but actually bringing in those from outside, even health, that are intersecting, the issues are intersecting with health. So for example, within our association, we look at school health, transportation, and the impact on health. So looking outside of just, the familiar health sectors, but also bringing in those that are working in areas, architecture and how that impacts health. just trying to think broadly outside the box. Who else should be part of this? And what do they bring to the table? And I think the best metaphor I can think about is, we're all looking at, let's say, an elephant that's in the room. From my standpoint, I'm looking at, the trunk, someone's looking at the tail, so thinking about that in terms of like how we approach these health problems. And, if we all came together and coalesced and brought, our observations, our experiences together, that if we put that together in a meaningful way, we could really look at how we bring change or make more of an impact, and not just working in our, individual silos.
Thanks, Vina. And I should really acknowledge that APHA has always created a platform for discussions on women in leadership in global health, and that's helped advance the dialogue. And so has the World Health Summit done that. And we need every global health platform to create space for conversations, both for gender, power, intersectionality. And so this is part of that transformational journey in gender transformative leadership. Maju, I turn to you with the same question on reflecting on the solutions. What can we do to take this forward?
Thank you. And a lot has been said already, very important aspects of this change that we all want to see. As an academic, I have to say that we need to really change our mindsets as educators and revamp all these global health outdated curriculums put by who, I wonder. So it is important when we're thinking about the future of public health and young public health professionals. What are they learning? Who wrote those textbooks? And that is an issue of power, right? Because tell me 2 or 3 popular textbooks written by Global South scholars with experience, with the knowledge, with the day-to-day exposures to the real issues. None. So that's that's number one. And number 2 is it's about time that we change the metrics and the reward systems in academia in the global north. It's about time, because what are they valuing? What are the leadership valuing, and that's going to change. But there is a lot of resistance for changing that, right? In all my work in global health, I use the community-based participatory research model approach. And in academia, there are 3 elements of evaluation: research, teaching, and service. And for people that are ignorant about what CBPR is, and these are leaders in global health and public health, what is community engaged research? They just think it's service. It falls under, oh, you're doing good service. I've got pats from my dean in my former institution. That's good service. Your TB research in Peru, right? And all you want to do is, I don't know what, but so it's really, it's changing the mindset. And I think, just to conclude this particular topic, we need to lead not as men, we need to lead as women, as a woman, because you hear a lot. In order to succeed, you need to lead like men. No, I started talking today that my greatest asset is my gender, and that's for a reason. And I think we need stronger female leaders to really move the needle in global health. Thank you.
Maju, couldn't agree more with you, and really enabling women from diverse backgrounds to lead and their leadership style. And a lot of commonalities between what Cholwe and you both have said about academic institutions being a place that harbor patterns that have not been changed over centuries, and the performance measures that disadvantage women and disadvantage especially women from the global South. This is the stage that we actually turn to this room, and I invite you to share your experiences and also questions to the panelists, but it's really meant to be a dialogue. So please don't be shy. I see one person I already am going to be asking to share some reflections, and that is Samega from our Samega is the co-founder of the Women in Global Health India chapter, and I have to share a story about the first few conversations I've had with her when forming the India chapter. She made it quite clear that you can't even look at a country as diverse as India without applying a power lens. And I really have to applaud the work of her and others in the India chapter that made it a point to say that all Indian women are not the same, and the diversity is quite a complex, interesting way of what they've done. So, Samega, I'd like to get your reflections, and if we can find the microphone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samega, and I don't want to take much time. And thanks, Rupa, for kind words, and to the wonderful panel. I just want to add a few things to what has been repeated, and especially to what you said, Maju. I think it's really important to underscore the production of knowledge in global health. You said we don't have much textbooks on global health from the global south, but we also don't have a lot of practice-oriented, implementation-oriented knowledge in global health. We have all the knowledge about global health coming from where the global health is not happening and someone else trying to tell us. I also want to underscore this whole knowledge generation, production business as being inherently paternalistic, and we need to question that. This whole domain of public health, global health, where someone else is telling us what to do, the whole idea of equity, someone else decides how much to give and to whom. Just to make it more complicated, that it should be us deciding about what we need, how we need, when we need, and it should be with us on how we want to lead and set an example. Just that Rupa mentioned about, and I won't lose that opportunity to talk about our India chapter. We did a lot of work with the frontline health workers during COVID and the challenges and the contributions that they made during COVID. And that was for the very, very first time that the voices from frontline health workers were heard at a national platform. Before that, their voices were just absent in the whole discourse, while they are the one who were actually running everything about COVID in the communities. Thanks to technology that we could connect with them over phones, over Zoom calls, and so on. But there is a need to kind of bring a change around that. These are some practical examples of hearing from who are at the ground and doing that work to bring them to the national or to the international forums. And after that, we actually saw a lot of those workers being invited to international forums because, you know, the point that I'm trying to say is there are opportunities, and once they're exploited, they become a norm. So we have to start exploiting those opportunities, and they will certainly become the norm sooner or later. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mega. So we can clearly hear the hopeful aspects, and I did put you on the spot. I see a couple of hands. I see the gentleman with the hand raised, and then also see someone in the back row there too. Yeah, if you could please introduce yourself and yeah, your organization.
Thank you to the great panel. My name is Paul Ndebele from the George Washington University School of Public Health. So I've seen some women who have gone up the ladder. Once they get there, they are now actually saying, I fought my way up here. And now they are not doing anything to ensure that they are supporting other women. And Vina mentioned that as women leaders, you need to be change agents. We had some nice stories, terrible, I won't say nice stories, but terrible stories about how you all moved to be where you are right now, the opposition that you have faced, all the efforts that you have put into your work so that you get to where you are now. But for me, I would have loved to hear more about what you have been doing as individuals to ensure that you are carrying other women along with you. So that at the end of the day, we're not only talking about you only. At the end of the day, the other women would also be talking about you as other leaders who have carried them from where they were up to the next levels. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd say my challenge right back at you that not just what women are doing, but what everyone in this room is doing to create opportunities for women that are from the global south to be at the highest level. So I think this is a collective responsibility. So definitely something for the panelists to respond, but to you, sir, as well. I see there was a hand up in the back there. If you could also introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone, and thank you to the panelists. My name is Sam. I lead a healthcare foundation for medical imaging around the world. And so as someone who was raised by two women, the sisterhood runs strong within me. But I have a question specifically for the panel about not just empowering women, but truly dismantling the boys' club. And at a previous organization I worked at, a few of us recognized there was truly a power dynamic of men, specifically white men who worked at the top, past military. So they had a certain culture of their own, of male dominance. And when we spoke up, we were labeled as troublemakers, as outspoken, which we were, but and proudly, but truly disgruntled. And that, I think, is the stereotype we often see that is attributed to women when they decide to try and hold systems of power accountable. And so my question is, what successful strategies and solutions have you tried and tested that truly did hold those systems accountable and then create change? So it's great to talk about, we want women in leadership, but how do we dismantle the systems that are currently male dominated? And it's a big question. It's a big undertaking. So just ideas and solutions here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that question and being very clear about this is a conversation about who has power and how are we going to change and transform that power and get it into hands of women that are underrepresented this. So I think I don't see any more hands up. I just want to make one more. Great. And then we'll turn it. Okay, two more. And then we're going to close the round of questions. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ana Ortega from Mexico. I work with Partners in Health. And I guess my question is what your thoughts are on affirmative action. I think that sometimes we cannot wait for men to be allies and to step down, but there actually has to be other measures put in place. And I also wonder if what your experience has been and if there have been any unintentional consequences with that as well. I currently work with 140 female community health workers, and we really only hire female community health workers. There's one male. And although there has been a lot of empowerment, especially economical empowerment when they are paid, there's also other unintended consequences. For instance, a lot of harassment, gender-based violence that comes with that, and different other barriers. So, yeah.
Thank you for that question. We'll definitely get into that. Yes, one more over here.
You're getting quite the rough.
Getting
the steps in over there.
Hi, thank you so much, Rupa. It's so nice to see you doing all this, and thank you for all the work you've been doing with women in global health over the last couple of years. And I just wanted to bring out a idea here, just given I'm also involved with women in medicine, and we've had a lot of discussions.
Introduced yourself too.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, my name is Bhavna Lal. I'm also an internal medicine physician with a background in global health at University of Houston right now. And I just wanted to make a point of that, in this room, we have how many, like 4 males in this room. And this is a women in global health forum. And this is something that I remember at Women Medicine too. We had hundreds of participants and just a couple of males. And how do we actually bring males to the table and have them discuss these topics when we have all these great ideas and we have all these thoughts about how we're going to change things. But when the sponsorship of who we need to be getting as sponsors is not present, how do we change anything? And I think that's something that we all are struggling with in medicine and public health in a lot of different fields is we have and thank you all for coming, the males that are here, but I think we really need to figure out ways that we can bring males to these events and bring males to the table to discuss these issues. But thank you for everything again.
Thanks for raising that.
How do you think we can do that?
Great. Well, I'm going to turn to our panelists. So we're going to reverse the order. Maju, if you want to respond first, and yeah.
Yeah, I have one of my greatest privilege in life is to be a mother, and I have a male teenage boy. And I think that's where we need to start. It's about time to change societal norms and the social fabric, our social footprints. And it's in our hands. I'm now I sound like now it's our fault and it's our responsibility, but it has an impact. I deal every single day with this teenage boy in really teaching about, and not just teaching, but through example of the equity aspect at all levels. So I think that I'm hopeful that that will have, an impact. And unfortunately, we live in a world, in a society that it doesn't sell that, right? The model is a success or effective. My son is in engineering, and sometimes when we discuss things, so what do you want to do about it? It's, for me, it's all engineering for societal change and social justice, but perhaps for an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, it's about the ladder, the career, the prestige, the money, and that's where the wrong things are, and we need to change the mindset that because for me, health is a social justice issue. That because that you are in public health and in medicine by chance, obviously is the very direct profession, but as an engineers, as psychologists, as teachers, as lawyers, we all have something to do about it. So that's my comment.
So starting early, starting with the boys, changing the mindset, starting in our homes. Vina?
Just to address the question about bringing other women, I think it's a lot of self-reflection and awareness of where you sit. I think we all there are push points, and we all are sitting in positions where there is power in one way or another. So how do we use that to really elevate or bring others to the table who are not able to be there? That's what I think has to be done if we're talking about really bringing meaningful change.
And I'm actually going to give a shout out to Vina and the stuff that she's done, because Sarah, you asked about concrete examples. So Vina has used her position at APHA, where she leads a portfolio on international health, to ensure that every annual conference that there is at least one technical session where there is conversations about women's careers in global health. And we've often even gone up to having 2 or 3 other sessions on other gender related topics. And that's a great way that Vina has been using her platform. And I think that definitely deserves a round of applause. We know how tough it is to get abstracts through conferences, so thank you for that. Sagiri, to you.
Great, thanks. So I might try and answer 2 of the many questions that came up. So one, back to you, I think that's a really valid question about how are we in our different positions amplifying and supporting the women that we work with or we supervise. So from my perspective, I have in the Institute, my title is Chief Gender and Health, and I supervise a group of young early career professionals, most of whom are women. And what I do try to do, there are 2 or 3 different strategies I employ. I employ a strategy of recognizing, appreciating, and acknowledging and making their work visible internally and externally. And I work very closely with them to identify opportunities where they might be visible externally. So oftentimes what happens in institutions, someone does the work and then the head takes the credit. And what I have tried to do is dismantle that, and for each person try and figure out how can we make this work visible? How can we make you visible? And where are there opportunities, and how might I support you? How do I lean in to support you or take a step back because you actually have it? And I think that that's been appreciated. It takes a lot of hard work and it's not easy. It takes time, but it's worth it. I think the second point I try and do is really try and build trust and safe environments and spend time with my colleagues, both trying to understand in an empathetic and listening way what's going on in their lives, both professionally and personally, because that is something that people don't live their lives in silos. We all live in this interconnected way. And that's really important to be able to support them in that way and reflect back. And I think that that's another piece that I want to flag. And the third one is just acknowledging when I'm wrong and being able to say, I'm sorry. I think that's really important because we don't do that enough. And I also think appreciating and celebrating where you've done well as a supervisor, because oftentimes supervisors feel like they're this, punching bag, but acknowledging and appreciating what the supervisors have done themselves is something else that we bring in. So those are different ways, very sort of concrete ways that I've tried to build that. Dismantling the boys club is a really good question because it's all about power, right? And if you think about this morning, and the World Health Summit has done a great job of giving space and actually having gender equity and women's leadership in the program, in the main program, as opposed to a side event somewhere. But even as you looked at today, when we had the welcome address, there were 3 men, and there was Ilona, and then there was the student representative. And, that to me was a very strong reflection of who's in power and who is not. So I think the dismantling is really critical. And I do feel building allies across various sectors, whether it's the head of a WHO regional office or, even an institution at the government level is really critical to start to carve out that space and get that space at the table and then into leadership positions and then supporting those leaders to then be able to further amplify and create space for others.
Thanks. Really great examples there, and one from even today for all of us to reflect on. I'm going to turn to you, Lenise.
Thank you. I'll also take the question on how I'm bringing other women along. I would say for me, I'm always about mentoring and sponsoring other women. I'm not just looking about who is ahead of me. I'm very much so interested in who is coming behind me because I got to where I am and I don't think I've reached where I plan to go yet, but I got to where I'm at right now because someone has reached behind and pulled me forward. And I do the same as well. So for example, as I mentioned, I recently completed Women's List Health North America Leadership Journey. And as a fellow in that program, they reach out to us to ask us to nominate other women for the program. And I have nominated people for that program. One is currently in the program now, and I've nominated colleagues that are in the East Africa region for that program as well. So I'm always thinking about that. I'm also an alumna of Global Health Corps. They're relaunching their US fellowship program, and we are also asked to nominate someone. I've actually nominated someone who is sitting in this room right now for that program, as well as another colleague. So I'm always about thinking about other people that I know that are leaders, but have not been given the opportunities that they might be desiring or looking for, whether that's, again, we talked about discrimination or other barriers that are put in place. So I'm big on mentoring. If I'm always in a position to hire, I'm also thinking about what is it that that person needs to succeed and set them up for success within their new role as well. And that includes whether I'm directly supervising someone or informally supervising someone if you work in a matrix type of environment. Sorry.
Oh, no, Choi, yes, please.
Yeah. Being the last one, I'll try to answer as many as I can. I'll begin with Sam's question. How do we dismantle the boys' club? I think this point has been raised by my colleague. Maybe we also need to go to the root, to the foundation, and continue talking to the boys about it, even as we talk to the girls about their places in leadership. The boys should also know and be aware that there's this aspect of gender equity in leadership. And so they should learn, they should try as much as possible as they progress in their career that they need to leave a space. In fact, when we talk about gender equity, even as we try to challenge men, we're not saying, let's tilt the pattern so that women are the ones holding to 70%. No, we're not doing that. We're saying, let's have an equal opportunity, which is fair and the right thing to do, which is ethical and which is something that should be done. So that's my thought regarding dismantling the boys' club. Paul, you spoke about what are we doing. As my colleagues have indicated, we are carrying along these women. I'll give an example. In Zambia, we have over 350 women who are women in global health. So we interact, we support each other. And I want to give one example that really keeps me awake each time I'm here in the US. I am a Harvard Lead Fellow and currently at Harvard, and have been privileged to have this capacity building and experience regarding gender equity and all other aspects to strengthen women's leadership. And each time I think about, I know that not every woman from the South will come to Harvard. Not every woman will come to Harvard or to George Washington. So how can we take Harvard to Zimbabwe? How can we take Harvard to Malawi? So it's our responsibility here, all of us here. We have a responsibility to take these opportunities to the women out there who cannot find their spaces, because we know ultimately they will, as my colleague Vina Lanis has said it, we need to mentor and support and sponsor, lead them to opportunities. And this is one thing that we do as women in global health. Weekly, we have a bulletin where we post opportunities. We post opportunities for training, for jobs. And we think by so doing, we're carrying women along. And we think after 10 years or so, I think the story will be different. Yeah.
Thank you, Cholwe. We are at time, and we've just touched the surface on these issues, but I want to say a special thanks to all of you for coming in and prioritizing this session. And I want to say a special thanks to our panelists, but some final closing takeaway messages. As I shared, we just launched this report at Women in Global Health called the XX Paradox, looking at women in leadership in global health, the status of it, and a couple of takeaways that will probably answer some of the questions that were raised is we must enable diverse women to lead. And for us, that means not having women fit into systems, but having systems being transformed. We need to have fast track options to address gender inequality in global health leadership. Someone asked about affirmative action or quotas. We are recommending having lists where it's all women shortlists. Why? Because all men shortlists have been existing for decades, if not centuries, and they still continue to exist. There are many jobs where the shortlist does not include women. In COVID-19, we've seen that with task teams around the world. So we are calling for quotas, shortlists. We're asking all of you to make an effort to create your own list of who are the women working in global health, and go a step further. Who are the women that are working in global health from diverse backgrounds that you want to bring into your work, whether it is your papers, your working groups, different expert committees, your panels, your conversations, or appointments that you're going to be opening up. We are calling for an increase in the visibility of women in health. So recognizing women in awards, Women in Global Health is part of the WorkOff Award Committee, and we're really thrilled to be able to say that we're hearing that this second round of the award has record high nominations of women, and that's another way that our organization is putting women forward, but all of us in our institutions can be bringing visibility to that. This next one about mobilizing men, and I think the woman there had to leave, but talking about how many men are in this room. Each time we host these conversations, the room does grow. I have to say it's a bit more than 4 men, but obviously not 50-50. So how do we make gender equality everybody's business, and that men see that they benefit from it as much as women do, as we know the harm it causes to boys and men when there is gender inequality too. But at the same time, we need to recognize men need to lean out. They need to step up as allies and end the male bonus syndrome, because it's not a fair game, as Cholwe, you were talking about. We need to end the default male bias and have some policies about accountability that support women's lives should be prioritized. We need to support collective action. We've heard those examples, and support women's movements, women's networks, and also have other push networks. I really appreciated that example because our report highlighted collective action. And finally, we need to deepen our understanding and strengthen the evidence base for policy with more research and data, but the type of research and data that is looking at what works, testing out solutions and testing out solutions in complex settings, because we know institutions and organizations are constantly transforming in global health. On that note, I want to say again a final thanks to all of you for tuning in, whether it's virtually or in the room. And let's make sure this is a conversation continues to be followed up with real action, as we know it's time for women to lead. Thank you.